Often people are really open about that when you engage with them, except for, the bad faith actors that are not looking to have a real conversation. So I think, and then even just on tools like Twitter or Facebook, I always try to remember that I'm a journalist on there and that people are watching how I'm doing what I'm doing. And I like to think that those things do sink in and that, piece by piece, you can help build it up. And, person by person. Like I was covering a murder trial in Red Deer a couple of years ago, and some person sitting next to me at the bar where I was having my dinner said something about the media, and I'm sure regrets it to this day, because I was like, okay, let's get talking here. And though it did get close to my one and only bar fight, we were able to pull it back, and in the end it was good. So I think just being as accountable as possible in some cases, really showing our work. I think showing our work is, that's what we were taught doing math in the old days, and I think that can be really powerful and take some of the mystery away for people. Yeah, so good to see you. Hello.
Hi, Jana. Good evening. First of all, on behalf of the Miniman family, I really want to thank you for coming and speaking here tonight.
Thank you.
When you described journalists as being cynical and melodramatic and nostalgic and not very well liked, I think you caught Uncle Don's personality perfectly. But at the same time, it is because of that and because of people like you who insist upon accuracy and insist upon not letting those character traits get in the way of telling what stories need to be told, that so many years after his retirement, 52 years now, and almost 40 since the lecture series has started, that this is still going strong. So I want to thank you for continuing to do that work. It's because of people like you that journalism is still very relevant, and he would be very proud of you for that.
That's incredibly kind. I really appreciate that. And I read up a lot about Don Minifee when I was preparing for this lecture, and he sounds like he was a truly amazing man. It really means a lot to have a member of his family, or several members of his family here in the audience. So yeah, thank you. He left quite a legacy. Hello.
Good evening. A couple of questions. The first one is to the audience. You had mentioned supporting outlets, and my question is to anyone here, what outlets are you subscribing to, or what are you supporting through online avenues such as Patreon? And there's other avenues, but what good journalism are you supporting by with your dollars? And the other question is, you mentioned earlier dealing with bad faith actors, and could you talk more about how to respond to them? Because it seems they are winning.
Yeah, so I think I would hope we would have trouble hearing about everyone's subscriptions. So I wonder if maybe there's a way to do that. Could we see a show of hands for anyone who subscribes to a newspaper, whether online, print, digital? Yes, hands up. Oh, okay. Yes, this isn't, the average audience picked off the street. Selection happening. What about Patreon or community funded? I think of the Swerve or Canada Land, or hands up, any community funded? Okay, yeah, amazing. There's some really great work being done in those areas. Anyone just giving money to journalists? Yeah, my family's here, sometimes helping me out. So, yes, my husband. And the second question about bad faith actors, I mean, that's a big one. And it's one playing out, it's not only playing out for journalism, of course, it's playing out in many other areas of our society right now. And all I can think to do is just keep fighting and keep doing your best. Some of those conversations, you have to shut them down. So when someone emails me, even if they send me an extremely abusive email, which does occasionally happen, swearing at a story, very angry, or if they call me, I will always respond once. And it's actually amazing how often the conversation can totally change based on that one response. If they then respond and they're still swearing at me, then I know that it's done. And so sometimes, that just has to happen. But I guess I'm lucky. Oh my God, knock on wood. Now it's probably all gonna go down the toilet. But I've been able to have some really good conversations with people, and not necessarily even just to bring them around to my way of seeing things, but that also I can see things from their perspective, and that really informs my writing in the future as well. So I really do believe in those conversations, even when people are maybe not super happy with you. And that's also why, I think accuracy and really believing in the story that you've done and telling it, that you've told it the way you want to tell it is so important, because it would be very hard to stand by your story if you know you've made terrible mistakes, or you've done something really wrong, or you've done something you don't believe was ethical. But yeah, keep fighting, I think. So, I don't know. If anyone has a great idea of how to deal with that, please let us all know, because I think there's a lot of those fights happening right now. Yeah.
Hey, hi. I also want to thank you for being the person who asks the tough questions. I've been in scrums with you in the past a million years ago, and I just remember thinking, I know this person needs to be asked some difficult questions. I don't feel like I'm the person to do that, but thank goodness there's somebody here who will. And I think that the whole concept of speaking truth to power is something that really resonates, and I want to applaud you and other journalists working on a national scope for putting yourself out there that way. I wanted to ask about the difference between working on a beat versus the scenario where you're doing 5 stories in a day and you don't feel like you have the knowledge or the time to really tell the story properly. Just the struggle there between, feeling like maybe you're part of the problem and you're just regurgitating press releases versus really understanding the context of the story that you're telling and being able to feel like you're helping.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and that is a tough one. We know how busy newsrooms are, and often, especially when you're the person starting out, or even when you're the senior person, it can feel like a bit of a grind. I think when there's ways to start developing knowledge in a certain area, sometimes those 5 stories a day, can start to at least be not totally disparate. They may be a bit. So at the Medicinet News, I started to focus a little bit on education. I may still have to run out to a fire and then write a wheat midge brief or something. But I think I know a lot about the wheat midge. I think it can be so frustrating, and the only thing you can do is maybe try to embrace it, because it makes you fast and it makes you good, and that's a good thing. And when I look back on my career, even the stories I'm doing now, where I'm afforded a lot more time to do them, I don't think I could do it if I didn't pound out stories like that for a long time. I'm an extremely fast writer when I need to be, and that comes from those kinds of crazy, those kinds of crazy days. So yeah, I think it can be really frustrating, and I'm the kind of person who was like at home reading through the criminal code when I started covering court, for instance, or would be reading school board agendas in the morning before work. So sometimes it isn't a 9 to 5 thing to get your feet beneath you, and sometimes that's just what you're gonna have to do for a while, and just embrace like, oh, it's making me really resilient, and then years from now I'm gonna be like, yeah, I know a lot about the wheat midge because that's like a thing that used to come up, or covering rodeo, whatever. Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Hi,
Thanks very much for your words tonight.
thank you for coming.
I've been involved in the last decade or so as a volunteer with Amnesty International. And I'm starting to view almost everything through a human rights lens. It strikes me, first of all, that power is mostly achieved through controlling narratives. And in our work, we find that journalism is the most dangerous job on the planet, and quite likely the most important. And we see that in everything from Donald Trump systematically discrediting everything that journalists say as fake news, to the governments of Saudi Arabia or Iran just jailing and then killing journalists. So I'd like you to talk about that level of importance worldwide, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think you'll get any argument from me on how important and also how dangerous it is. And, I have the luxury of working for the most part in relative safety here in Canada. Sometimes I read my colleagues' dispatches from around the globe, and also reporters working in other countries. And we just know that it's becoming more and more dangerous, and that discrediting the media and shutting down those narratives of the people is a very dangerous step in no matter what country it occurs in.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You talked at the start about one of the things you enjoyed when you first started was that connection to people and being able to tell their story. And you also started giving a list of problems seen in journalism by Ms. Wallen, and we can all see that those relate today and today's time. And I'm wondering, when we notice those changes and the negatives happening, like what's happening to journalism seems like an overarching problem happening to society. Is it the duty, once a journalist finds out about this, to rebel against it? I'm thinking in terms of the internet and in terms of TV. Is it ethical to be seeing this device that has caused so much pain and using it as a tool, or is it our job to rebel against it when we know it's harmful?
And do you mean specifically like technology, say the internet or television?
I would say both.
Boy, that's a tough question. I think that that's a very tough question. I think those technological tools, I guess I don't personally believe them to be inherently evil or inherently dangerous, but that certainly they can be used that way. Those are platforms in which myself that I am able to reach people. So I'm not sure that that's a choice that I could make. I'm not sure how I would reach readers without that. But I think in a general sense, all reporters need to think really carefully about, the ethical choices that they're making that relates to them and their work. I mean, there's a question, it's not exactly the same, but a little bit related, that comes up with people who cover politics. whether people who cover politics should vote or not. And that's a really complex question. There's a lot of thoughts about that either way. These are questions, there's no easy answers for them, but certainly lots of things to discuss and be really thoughtful about. And I think be able to explain to yourself and also to others why you do what you do.
I just wondered, could journalism become more relevant if journalists rejected that platform and decided they were going to revive these papers, small print papers?
Well, I mean, I would love to see that. I'd be typing on that typewriter if it was up to me. So, yeah. I mean, I think there's certainly, I still really believe in the value of the printed word. I read loads online. I also read loads in print, and it's always interesting to me how I read different stories online. I come across different kinds of stories in print. So I think maybe doing both, or I don't know, but if you're leading a print revival, I'm there. I'm with you, yeah, for sure.
Hi. I'm interested in your perspective on the idea of advocacy journalism and how relevant that is as an approach to journalism. When I was in J school 20 odd years ago, it was, be careful about your bias, and keeping back as far as possible. When you have an approach to journalism that puts that bias out front, I'm thinking, for example, an organization working for, Amnesty International or Samaritan's Purse or whatever organizations where they want to follow journalistic standards, and be presenting information accurately and following all those, and yet have the, implicit bias. How, I don't know, I guess I'd be interested just in your thoughts about that approach to journalism. Is it journalism or is it just public relations? And what standards should that kind of journalism be kept to?
You should definitely read June Callwood's Menifee lecture transcript in this book, because she speaks specifically about advocacy journalism. It's a very, very interesting talk. That is an interesting question, and we're seeing that discussed a lot right now. And it can be a very fine line, I think, sometimes. I don't personally tend to believe that there's such a thing as, say, a brand journalist. I don't like that expression. And I am not always sure about whether journalism would be possible for an organization that is not a news organization. But I do think we're seeing a lot of journalism that has varying levels of advocacy in it. I think the most important thing is to be honest and transparent with the reader, so the reader knows where it's coming from. So a story that's produced by, say, an organization like Amnesty International may be a very good, important story, totally factual, totally accurate, and as long as the reader knows where that's coming from and why, then I think the reader can understand that and forces that may or may not be at play. And then same with a story for a news organization. If there's a reason why the reporter, is advocating for something or is becoming part of the story, or I think just being open and honest is the best way, and then people can read that and decide for themselves if it matters or doesn't matter to the story. But definitely read June Callwood. She talks about it much better than myself. I think it's a very interesting question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're supposed to probably wrap up. There is drinks at the Owl that everyone is invited to, I think, right? I was allowed to just invite everybody, right? Okay. You're all invited.
Can we expense that?
Yeah. So I'll be heading over there if there's a question that you didn't ask or were too shy to ask. Journalists are all very shy at heart, so feel free to come up and say hi. And otherwise, thank you all so much for joining me.